Because you're going to be in the school.
What country did you immigrate from, and what year?
I came to this country from Israel in 1959. I was born in 1952. I was 6.5 years old.
How were you when you came from the United States? Okay.
And the reason we came to this country is a funny story. My parents both came from Czechoslovakia, which at that time was Czech. Well, it was two different countries, and they were kind of like next door to each other, but they didn't know each other. And they were both imprisoned because all the Jews were, and they had brothers and sisters who were in concentration camps. They were separated from them. And my parents were in jails. And the only way that my parents actually met was, my father was the kind of guy where he was a tough kid. And whenever the Nazis or the Germans, whoever, at that time, you were prisoners of you didn't even know why, but when they asked you to do something, he always put his hand up to work, because he figured if he was important to them, they wouldn't kill him. Mm-hmm. So that's how my father ended up being a baker. He learned how to be a baker. And so he was given kind of special privileges once in a while. Then my father was jailed, because after a while, they don't care. They're going to kill everyone. And in that jail, people from the letter A to the letter M were taken out of the jail and executed. My last name is Niederman. So my father the next day would have been taken out and executed with the rest of them. The resistance in that time paid the Nazis money to let the rest of the prisoners out. And so they let my father out of jail. And my father started helping kids go from one spot to another, escaping the Nazis. And that through the resistance. Well, he would help escape kids, then he would go back, help them again, back and forth, until he met my mother. Once he met my mother, he kept going with her. And to make a long story shorter, and this is hard to believe, they literally walked through Europe, through Italy, walked, and escaping the Nazis the whole way through. There was a time where they were captured. That was horrific. They were all hiding in a house, and there was about 20 of them, and the size of the room was the size of your kitchen. And they stayed in this house for days, on the basement, and there's snow outside, and it's freezing, and they're starving, and you can imagine, for days and days and days, no bathrooms, and finally the Nazis found out that they were hiding there. And to get them out, they shot tear gas down there until everyone came up. They made them all undress, and they laid in the snow, in the cold snow, to punish them. Once again, they escaped from the Nazis. My father, my mother, and their friends, and they did. They made it out of Italy, and they got to a boat, and they got on this boat, and that boat took them to Israel, which was everyone's attempt, was to get to Israel, because Israel was the land of the Jews, and they would be free there, away from the Nazis. And that's how my father and mother survived the nightmare. None of my uncles did, except for one, my mother's brother. My father lost his entire family. He had 5 sisters, all died in concentration camps. Today, my father and mother are both alive. They're 90 years old each. They're probably one of the oldest Holocaust survivors still left. Probably one of the oldest in New Jersey, that's for sure. It's amazing that they're so young. Think of it, they were 17 years old. 17 years old. And they were able to muster this, I don't know where the strength comes from. I can't imagine to be that tough, you know? But I guess when you see what surrounds you, and it's life and death, you'll do anything to survive. My mother actually had it worse than my father. My mother was captured and tortured before she met my father. And the reason they tortured her and the things they did to her, which she can't speak about today, is she doesn't understand their language. The language was different. She's being interrogated in German, and she speaks Hungarian. And they were so angry that they would punish her. They would hit her. They would do a lot of different things that I can't even talk about, and she can't talk about. The Red Cross saved her, and she was hidden by the Red Cross for a year until my father found her, and they went on their escape and ended up in Israel. And that was in 1946.
Did you have relatives already? If so, why and who?
We didn't have relatives because basically they're all murdered. But my parents had friends who emigrated to the United States the year before. Now, you got to remember, in 1946, they didn't have a lot of money. So the friends who did come to America thought America was unbelievable. It was wonderful. They couldn't believe how great it was. But they were lonely because their friends, my parents and other people that were still in Israel, were in Israel and they're in the United States. So they wrote letters to my parents saying, you have to come. This is the greatest country ever. There's free chocolate. There's gold in the streets. There's so much money. It's wonderful. The living conditions, you have to come. It's just the greatest place on earth. They kind of lied to him, because they missed them and they wanted him to come. My father at that time was a baker. He had learned that trade, and now he's a baker. And he had actually been a partner in a bakery with another guy. He sold everything. He says, you know what? We're going to America. It sounds wonderful. We have to go. Sold everything we had for 4 tickets on a boat called the Zion. In Hebrew, it's called Tzion, but it's Americanized, it's called the Zion. And he sold, as I said, every penny he had to get 4 tickets to go on this boat with a little bit of pocket change. None of us spoke a word of English. And here we go on our trip, in 1959.
What form of transportation did you take?
Well, we took that boat.
Did you pass through Ellis Island or another place?
We passed through Ellis Island with everyone else, and the most amazing thing, first of all, the tickets for the boat, even though in today's standards are cheap, it was the worst time of year to come. The seas were the roughest at that time of year. And of course, that was the cheapest tickets he could afford. So that's the time we went. The trip took 14 days. 14 days, and 13 out of 14 days, I was so sick, so seasick. Everyone on the boat was. I remember vividly laying in a bunk, just holding my head and vomiting. I couldn't keep any food down. I remember the only thing I could eat were pears for some reason. I don't know why it sticks in my mind, but that's the only thing I could hold. And it was torture. But the 14th day, the last day, I felt better. And I went upstairs, I went outside, and I saw the skyline of New York, and I saw the Statue of Liberty. Well, previously, I had never seen a building taller than 2 stories. That was the biggest building I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw the skyline of New York and the Statue of Liberty, I started crying. I went and I told my father, I want to go back home. I'm scared. I don't want to be here. Let's go back. Let's go back to Israel. Because it was immense. It was unbelievable. And it was scary for I'm a little boy. I'm 6 years old. I have an older brother who's 5 years older. And he told me to shut up, not to worry, everything's going to be okay. He thought it was awesome. He couldn't wait. And that's when we went to Ellis Island, and that was that day that we landed. What's your next question?
Did you leave any family behind? If so, who? How did they feel about you coming to America?
Well, as I say, even though they weren't actual family members, I called everybody aunt and uncle. Everyone that I knew was my aunt and uncle until later on in life. I didn't know that they weren't really my aunts and uncles, but they were considered aunts and uncles because that's how close everybody was. And we left. I'm sure my parents left a lot of people behind that they were sorry. They didn't want them to go, of course. Nobody wanted anyone to leave, but my father thought it was, from that letter, he wants to do best for his family.
Yeah.
So my father, remember, in 1959, my parents were 32 years old, with an 11-year-old, a 6-year-old, not a penny to their name, and speak no English, none of us. When we came here, my father's friend let us stay in his home for a few days, and he helped my father rent an apartment. My father went to work the same week we landed. He found a job someone had helped him find a job at a bakery. It was called Pector's Bakery. It's in Harrison, New Jersey. As a matter of fact, it's still there.
Really?
Yes. And my father was working like 18 hours a day, while we were living in Bayonne, in a high-rise story apartment, 2-room apartment, overlooking the train tracks and the trains. And all day long, the train would go by, and this train was long. And I, as a little boy, had nothing to do, of course. I don't know anybody, I'm not in school yet. I'm going to go to school, this was like the summer kind of coming up, so I was going to go to school the next, in September. I used to look out the window and count the different train cars. I would count 60, 70, 80 cars. It was amazing. And I remember playing, believe it or not, with Lincoln Logs. That's what I did. And when I went outside to play, I didn't speak any English. I didn't know anybody. It's a funny story. I still remember this. There were a couple of kids right down the street when I went outside to play. And the word in Hebrew, shalom. Everyone knows the word shalom now, but those three kids were like about to leave each other, and I heard one kid say to the other, "So long," and I said, "Shalom, shalom, shalom." You know, I thought he said shalom, and the kid said so long, and he's looking at me like I'm retarded, you know. And obviously they went away thinking that was crazy, and meanwhile, I really didn't have anyone to play with except for my brother, but it lasted until I went to school the following, fall.
What were you feeling when you left your homeland, and when did you first arrive at America?
I first arrived in America in 1959, and I didn't want to leave my homeland, and when I left, I was very lonely because I left everyone that I knew behind. Next.
What did you bring with you?
Nothing, since we had nothing. Just the clothes off our backs, and that's it. And pictures. That's all we had.
What was your first impressions of America?
I thought it was really, really big. Everything was so large. I was used to buildings no bigger than 2 stories, and now I see the Statue of Liberty, I see the New York skyline. I was scared to death. It was gigantic.
Who were the first people that you met here in America?
Well, the first people I met in America is when I went to school. My teacher, Miss Heistine, who incidentally loved me because she was Jewish. Here I was, an Israeli Jewish little kid, didn't speak a word of English, and she just treated me so wonderful. And the first person I ever met was my friend Jeffrey Cohn, who to this day we're best friends still.
What was your first job once you were here in the U.S.?
I was a paper boy. When I was 12 years old, my father said it's time for me to get a job. So I became a paper boy. I was horrible at it. It's way too early to get up to do this. People wouldn't pay me, and I let them go. And by the end, I was owing the newspaper people money. So after like 6 weeks, I said, that's it, I quit. And I didn't work until I was like 18 or 17.
Where do you first live, and where did you move since?
We first lived in Bayonne, but that was only for a few months. And then we moved to Newark. I went to Maple Avenue School the first 3 years, and in the 4th grade we moved over to the other side of Newark. And I went to Chancellor Avenue School. And then in 10th grade, in 9th grade I went to Weequahic High School. In 10th grade, after the 67 riots, 1967, those bad riots in Newark, the place changed totally, and I told my parents, we have to move because it's scary, and there's a lot of violence in my school, and we moved to Springfield in 1967.
Did you ever go back home to visit? How were you received?
Yes, I went back to Israel when I was 18 years old. After I graduated in 1970, I graduated high school. 18 years old, I went with my brother, who had just got out of Vietnam, and we went for 3 months. And of course, we were treated wonderfully. We got to see all of my parents' friends and some of the people I really didn't remember, but they remembered me, that's for sure. And we were treated wonderfully.
Did you meet up with your wife here in America, or did they come to the country with them?
No, I met my wife here in the United States.
Do you have any regrets coming to the U.S.? Please explain.
I have no regrets coming to the United States. The United States is the greatest country on earth, and believe me, it's wonderful because I've lived where it's rough and there's wars and terrorism. This country is the greatest ever.
Do you still keep in touch with your family or friends from the country that we immigrated from?
Yes, I do. My cousins Hannah and Ricky, we talk all the time. We're on Skype. We're friends on Facebook, and their children, and they come here quite often to visit. And my mother and Hannah speak on the phone on a daily basis.
Do you remember any instances of discrimination? If so, please explain and elaborate.
Well, I was so young, I didn't know what all, the Holocaust and the war and people hating Jews, and didn't know why, I never knew anybody that wasn't Jewish until I came to this country. But I didn't hate anybody, except for the Arabs. I gotta be honest. But that's what I was taught because that's who we were at war with. But here, once I came to America, no, I had, I know people hated me because I was Jewish. I didn't know why, but I didn't hate anybody.
Thinking back, what do you remember about immigrating to the U.S.?
Well, I was a little kid and I was lonely. That's what I remember. I didn't have anyone to play with, except for my brother who tortured me. So, besides that, but once I got to school and I started learning English, everything was great.
All right, thank you for your time.
You're welcome, Jason.